On Primetime Politics Tonight, the pre-budget special. On the eve of the Finance Minister's economic plan for Canada, we'll look at the challenges and the expectations. Housing affordability will feature prominently in the budget. What approach will the Finance Minister take to dealing with the shortage of supply and these spiraling costs? Housing Minister Ahmed Hussen will be here to discuss that. And our panel of party commentators will also be here about choices, challenges, and budget politics. And we will hear more on Budget Day, I'm sure, about the decision today by the federal government to approve the massive Bay du Nord offshore oil project, 500 kilometers east of Newfoundland. How will that affect the government's climate plan? More on that coming up a little later. Canadians are about to get a look, though, at the Liberal government's detailed economic blueprint for the country. The federal budget will be delivered at 4 p.m. Thursday by Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland. As part of the pre-budget ritual, Freeland was at an Ottawa mall today buying new designed-in-Canada shoes for the budget presentation. The budget will be the minority government's plan to chart a green economic path forward from the pandemic, tackle the affordability challenges facing Canadians, especially in housing, and shore up defence spending in an uncertain world. It's also aimed at satisfying the demands of the NDP as part of that deal to keep the minority government afloat for the next 3 years. And that means tens of billions of dollars more in new, permanent spending and more questions about the level of the deficit and debt. In the House of Commons today, the Prime Minister faced questions about the choices his government will make in that budget.
There's no doubt that tomorrow we will see an irresponsible, high-tax, high-spend budget from the NDP Liberal coalition, one that promises to drive up inflation. The more money these guys spend, the more everything becomes more expensive. Canadians are worse off today than they were 6 years ago. The Prime Minister is ignoring calls for a responsible budget. He's ignoring calls for tax relief for Canadians. The only people he seems to be listening to are the NDP, and the only reason he's doing it is so that he can hold power. Yep. Isn't that the truth?
That's right.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the Leader of the Conservative Opposition spent the first two questions telling us we needed to do more to support Canadians, and then spent this question saying we're doing far too much for Canadians. Mr. Speaker, we've made a commitment to have Canadians' backs while remaining fiscally responsible. That's exactly what we've done over these past 6 years. That's what we're going to continue to do with tomorrow's budget and with our investments in Canadians over the coming years.
Hear, hear.
In a moment, I'll be joined by Canada's Minister of Housing, Ahmed Hussen, to discuss the issue of housing and challenges in supply and affordability. But first, CPAC's Andrew Thomson has this primer on what to watch for when the Finance Minister delivers her budget in the House of Commons Thursday afternoon.
Chrystia Freeland's latest mandate letter told her to drive a plan for long-term growth and implement the fiscal plan outlined in Budget 2021. That plan anchored in unwinding COVID-related deficits and reducing the federal debt-to-GDP ratio over the medium term.
If we increase the GDP, that curve is going to come down, and fighting COVID was expensive. So my focus really growing Canada's economic capacity and potential.
But in preparing this budget, Freeland and the Finance Department must now consider another document.
The Liberal Party has reached an agreement with the new Democratic Party to deliver results for Canadians now.
And they must account for war in Europe and how it exposed gaps in Canada's military.
I will continue to press for resources for the Canadian Armed Forces so that they are prepared to fight and win.
And how the war has driven up commodity prices.
There are also economic consequences of this war, and we have to take all of those into account as we finalize the budget, and we are.
Last fall's fiscal update had already signaled a reduced deficit thanks to GDP inflation and lower than expected pandemic spending. Now, oil exports could provide even more room for a government that campaigned on $78 billion in new spending.
That included money to build a greener, more inclusive economy, to boost healthcare and long-term care, and to make housing more affordable. Freeland's mandate letter calls for more spending to boost housing supply, a tax-free first home savings account, and a doubling of the first-time buyer's tax credit. an anti-flipping tax, and a 2-year ban on the foreign purchase of non-recreational housing.
Show me where the mold is building up. Oh, wow.
And there's Indigenous housing. The recent Liberal NDP confidence agreement calls for significant new spending. The deal also commits the Liberals to a new national dental care plan for all low-income Canadians by 2025, starting with children under 12 this year, and to a national pharmacare plan by 2023.
We don't have numbers around it, but I think that we could easily add another 15-20 billion net, once you consider all the number of measures that the Liberals were likely going to do anyway.
In return, the NDP pledges to support the minority Liberal government on all confidence votes. That effectively keeps the Liberals in power for a full 4-year mandate. For the official opposition, the deal sounds like a no on fiscal restraint.
I would say there is no hope of reduced taxes. There is no hope of seeing any control of the spending. It is, I think, a very dire situation for Canadians.
But the Prime Minister argues the government can stay responsible and flexible.
The agreement with the NDP is very much about delivering on specific things for Canadians, but doesn't in any way impact on the choices we make in areas not covered by that agreement.
One of those areas, national defense, with calls to boost spending in the wake of Russia's attack on Ukraine. This budget coming just weeks after NATO members agreed to accelerate their financial commitments.
NATO's security environment has fundamentally changed for the long haul, and we are responding. But security doesn't come for free, and doing more will cost more.
Canada ranks near the bottom of NATO for its share of defense spending, at less than 1.4% of GDP. Now, the current plan calls for a rise in spending from $26 billion this year to nearly $33 billion by 2027. But that still falls short of NATO's goal to spend 2% of GDP, at a time when Germany, Poland, and other allies are ramping up.
Time is of the essence in everything we do, when so much is at stake for Canada and for the world.
It's going to be much more difficult for Canada to go to those meetings and basically make the same kind of argument that we have been for years, that we may be falling far short of those spending targets, but we still do a lot elsewise, and that should count. You can spend money on virtually anything that would fall under the military's purview, and that would count towards that target. So we should think about things that are in our own national interest, and I think top of mind should be a range of different investments related to continental defense, and beyond that in our Navy.
Jagmeet Singh calls the 2% target arbitrary, but hinted his party can live with a higher defense budget if the money's also there for NDP priorities.
No decision around military spending should get in the way of our investments in healthcare, should not end up cutting our healthcare or the initiatives that we fought for.
Singh's agreement with the Prime Minister also touches on climate change, and the budget may offer more detail on the $9.1 billion pledged last week to reduce emissions. But this budget also arrives amid high anxiety over rising prices and the cost of living. The war in Ukraine is expected to put even more pressure on low-income Canadians, with interest rates on the rise and inflation already at a 30-year high. The question is whether federal spending helps ease that pressure or adds to it.
There's a legitimate case for doing something for those households, but it is complex because it has to be very targeted. So they have to look at measures that are time-defined and are really focused on reaching Canadian households that need it right now.
The government argued last fall that the fiscal outlook allowed for more spending, and that Canada's labour market, the key guardrail for massive pandemic support and stimulus, had not returned to normal. The latest data shows strong job numbers and a continuing economic rebound, though it's worth noting the Finance Minister will rise in the House Thursday amid yet another spike in COVID-19 cases.
It's a really tricky moment right now to be putting out a budget. The fiscal path may not look all that different relative to December, but you'll have to, cut through the noise and see what's happening because there are a lot of moving pieces right now.
And so we wait for the details on how Chrystia Freeland and her department want to handle the moving pieces, from COVID to the cost of living to conflict abroad, while also meeting those mandate letter goals of growth and long-term sustainability. For CPAC, I'm Andrew Thomson.
As we just heard, measures to create more housing and make it more affordable are expected to feature prominently in tomorrow's budget. The latest figures from the Canadian Real Estate Association show the average cost of a home in February was just under $817,000. The cost of renting is up almost 5% from this time last year. Canada has the fewest number of houses per 1,000 people in the G7 at just 424. So, high expectations for help in the budget. Ahmed Hussen is Canada's Minister of Housing. He joins me now. Minister, good to see you again. Thanks for taking time to speak with me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Look, there are lots of leaked reports tonight. We're hearing lots of information that the budget will contain $10 billion over 5 years for housing initiatives. What can you tell us?
Well, I can't speak to what is in the budget. We will have to wait for Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland to unveil the budget, and I'm obviously hopeful that, for the last 5 budgets, our government has consistently increased investment in housing through the National Housing Strategy, but you'll have to wait for Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland's budget tomorrow to find out what's in there.
Reasonable to assume, though, and that's what a lot of the leaks are based on tonight, is the election promises. Should we expect the budget to follow through with, and what have you been pitching as minister on a couple of key things, a ban on foreign buyers purchasing residential property for 2 years, and this tax-free savings account allowing people under 40 to save up to $40,000 for their first home. Those were election promises. Are those things that you expect to see in the budget?
Well, we're moving forward on all our commitments, including making sure that we contribute to more housing supply in Canada through the Housing Accelerator Fund. This is something that we made a commitment to Canadians, and in addition to that, we intend to work very closely with provinces, territories, and municipalities, Indigenous governments, and organizations to make sure that we continue the federal investments in housing through the National Housing Strategy, through investments in making sure, for example, that we continue to support Canadians through rent supplements through the Canada Housing Benefit. These are things that we committed to Canadians to continue to do, and we're doing exactly that.
How concerned are you that providing those kinds of incentives and supports for home buyers in particular will actually push up prices by keeping the demand higher? Do you worry about that?
Well, our supports for home buyers are limited to only first-time home buyers, and we know that many first-time home buyers need a little bit of support so that they can turn from renters into homeowners, and that's something we're proud to do. As a government, we feel that it is our responsibility to help as many Canadians as possible to access their dream of home ownership through programs like the First-Time Home Buyer Incentive. What we've heard from Canadians is that they need us to enhance that program, and we will do exactly that and address all the other issues that are related to home ownership, including, for example, making sure that there's more supply in this country. And one of the ways to do that is to work directly with municipalities to see how we can help them to overcome the barriers to building more supply for everyone across the housing spectrum and build it faster.
How do you get around that?
Well, I mean, if you look at our Rapid Housing Initiative, which was launched in 2020 as a result of COVID, it was our government's response to COVID's challenge with respect to housing the most vulnerable Canadians. We were able, between the first and second round, to exceed our targets, and the result is and will be over 10,250 homes built in 12 months or less. We did that in partnership with municipalities, with nonprofits, with Indigenous governments and communities, and so when the federal government stepped up and put those, there was only 2 conditions to that program. One was that you had to build in 12 months or less, and the second one was that you had to target one or more vulnerable populations. And guess what? People stepped up, and that is the kind of collaboration that results in tens of thousands of Canadians having access to deeply permanent and affordable housing and taken off the street and given a safe and affordable place to call home. So these are transformational investments, and we'll continue to do exactly that.
You talked about the Rapid Housing Program, which provides money to municipalities to build modular homes or to buy and retrofit buildings for affordable housing. That's a demand of municipalities and of the NDP as part of the deal you made with them. The Prime Minister said it would be extended for a year. Should it be extended longer than that, given the take-up and the impact?
Well, I got to add to what you just said. 38% of the first round of the Rapid Housing Initiative investments went to Indigenous communities, because that's where the need is greatest. And in the second round, it's as high as 41%. So it shows you that the program is working, and we're very happy with the fact that it will now be available for an additional year, and we'll continue to make those investments and continue to collaborate with communities and nonprofits and cities that have demonstrated really an agility, a nimbleness, the ability to move very quickly.
But I guess what I'm asking is if the take-up is so good, if the program's so successful, why just extending it for another year? Because then the sort of the momentum you're building sort of comes to a dead stop, doesn't it?
Well, this was a program, actually. It was a temporary program. It wasn't part of the, it was never a permanent program. It's a program that was started as a result of COVID. And I'm happy that it is being extended by an additional year. We'll wait to see what happens in the budget moving forward on this and many other housing initiatives.
Okay, you touched on the Accelerator Fund. The NDP is also holding you to a one-time $500 top-up of the Canada Housing Benefit to help low-income renters who've been hit hard by inflation. Good idea?
Well, the Canada Housing Benefit, again, has and is helping literally hundreds of thousands of people. In my home province of Ontario, 50,000 Ontarians.
Right. Is the top-up a good idea? Are we going to see that?
I think the program is working really well. Let's see the budget tomorrow, and we'll see what the details are in there. But I can tell you the Canada Housing Benefit is a very important program. It's a game changer. This is the first rental supplement program that the federal government has unveiled, and it's working really well. And people are being impacted very positively by this program.
All right, Housing Minister Ahmed Hussen, good of you to take the time tonight, sir. Good to see you again, and we'll watch for the budget. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Well, it's expected funding for climate change will have an important place in Thursday's budget as well. But today the government is facing some criticism over its decision today to approve the Bay du Nord offshore oil project east of Newfoundland and Labrador. Norwegian oil company Equinor plans to use a massive floating production vessel to produce up to 200,000 barrels daily starting in as early as 2028. The approval comes a week after the federal government unveiled its plan for emissions reductions. Well, let's bring in our panel of party commentators now, who will all be watching the budget details closely on Thursday. Susan Smith, Tim Powers is a Conservative commentator, and Kim Wright's an NDP commentator. Good to see you all. Susan, the government's approving the Bay du Nord oil production project. What does that do to the credibility of the government's climate plan and whether it really is serious about cutting emissions from the fossil fuel sector? How can it defend this?
I think it is very serious about cutting emissions from the fossil fuel sector, and it's all about doing things better. With new technology, you can reduce emissions. There's no question, and there's never been any. We still have to heat our homes, drive our vehicles, and we have partners in Europe who need resources that don't come from Russia. There's no better place to do that kind of development than in Canada. It's something on the East Coast. It's jobs that are very, very important to the East Coast, and it's all about the way you do it. So if you're going to bring a new project online, you bring it in a new way that does things differently and takes emissions into account.
Tim, you know what this project means to the economy of your home province. What do you think it means to the Liberal government's claim that it's serious about funding? Can you do this and still have a credible climate plan?
Well, I think that's the argument Premier Furey and Seamus O'Regan made, not to make the argument for the Liberals for them, but The oil on the offshore coasts of Newfoundland and Labrador, under the water there, has much less GHG in it than oil in other parts of the world. I think it's like 6 kilograms per barrel compared to 48 for some of the oil that's produced in Alberta. And that's the argument that Premier Fury, Seamus O'Regan, and others, and the opposition in Newfoundland and Labrador have been making. I mean, this is a massive deal for Labrador. There was political risk there for them too, because Peter, slightly, but Newfoundland and Labrador, who's always voted consistently Liberal, at least since the 80s, could have lost 6 Liberal MPs in the next election if this project were not approved. It was that important. The trouble now is going to be with Minister Guilbeault and in Quebec and how they explain this deal there, and trying to link it to their just transition agenda, because if they really are about just transition, this is a good project. Just transition should be.
Okay, Kim, what do you think of this decision?
Yeah, there's a lot of coulds and shoulds and maybe, and certainly maybe it's a lot better than when the project was originally predicted and talked about a decade or so ago. There are lots of concerns that the environmentalists are moving. There's also the political, not only in Quebec, but as part of their new collaboration and oversight with the New Democrats, how this will unfold. But there is no question that how we wrap our minds around the energy sector writ large, how do we ensure that there are protections for the environment while we can still maintain our own independency from in the geopolitical space. These are critically important things. This cannot just be another press release and maybe we'll get around to protections later. Those protections.
Okay, Susan, let's to the budget here, and we may hear more about Bay du Nord in the budget as well, but lots of demands for Finance Minister has to consider. Those decisions have been made by now. What are you expecting to see by way of new spending, and will we see some sort of longer-term vision for the economy than just plugging, funding in here and there, sort of everywhere, and with some sense of what that means over the long term?
I do hope fervently that there is a long-term vision for the economy. I do think we'll see it. We're seeing leaks and things about a growth fund, which is focused on green economy and as part of the transition and moving in that direction. We've been hearing in a critical mineral strategy. Those are the minerals that we need to make ours. We've seen some recent investments on that. I hope there are mechanisms that enable Indigenous communities to participate significantly from an equity perspective in natural resource development. That's something that's been missing, and I think we could see that as well. And in terms of the immediate spending, I do see an immediate spend in the defense sector. This is something that has been called for. We're acutely aware of it in the context of Ukraine. Right. On the down the road spending, pharmacare, dental care.
All right, Tim, what do you want to see in the budget? Not so much the dollar by dollar issues, but a guiding vision or a guiding principle for what all of the spending is supposed to do at the end of the day for this country.
Yeah, well, what do the next 10 years look like as best you can predict? Appreciating that if somebody had tried to predict 10 years ago, 2 years ago, they would have been wildly off the mark. Pandemic. I think, look, what is the strategy for managing the deficit over time? Because that does matter. We can't keep spending the way we are. What is the strategy for attracting and retaining business in Canada? Look, Peter, it's no coincidence that the Bay du Nord announcement was today and the budget is tomorrow, because as is expected in the budget, where there's going to be some taxation measures in there that big business is not going to like. So how is the government going to try and find accord with big business, who we still need in this country to fund and drive the programs that are so important? And I guess the last thing I'm looking for are, where are the no's going to be in that budget? Because there's a lot of laudable things the finance minister and the prime minister say they want to spend money on and seem to be indicating that they will. Can't spend money on everything. So what doesn't make their top priority list, and how does that shake out?
Kim Wright, the leaks suggest we're going to see a significant NDP handprint on the budget as part of the agreement between the NDP and the Liberals. What do you want to see? And talk to me as well about, is this the kind of budget that needs to talk about transformation, about, as Tim suggests, where the country is going to be a decade from now?
Well, look, as I always say, show me your budget and I'll show you your values. And this is an opportunity for this government in minority parliament with an agreement with the New Democrats on confidence and supply to actually show the things for decades. Meaningful movement on dental care. If that is not in there, I'm not sure that the development of this deal with the New Democrats is worth the paper it's printed on. We'll also want to see meaningful movement on pharmacare. We're starting to see some of the stuff around housing strategies, in particular affordable housing. Those are going to be not only New Democrat priorities, but they are the priorities of Canadians. And look, this is an opportunity for this government to show that they can walk and chew gum. Yes, there will be defense spending, absolutely. And they were looking for a dance partner on that before this deal with the New Democrats came to fruition. But there is also the things on social programs, on the environment, on Indigenous affairs. Those need to be front and center. So again, it's a walk and chew gum budget. At least it should be.
All right, Susan. Let's finish on this. Do we need to see some sort of commitment from the Liberals in this budget on a path to some sort of fiscal prudence, some sort of way out of the cycle of spending down the road with a view to balancing budgets and cutting the debt?
I think you'll see Minister Freeland talk about a fiscal anchor. This is something they've talked about before. Debt to GDP has always been something that's very important that the Liberals have kept an eye on, and even in the context of the pandemic spending, which I think across all parties we recognized as a country we had to do, they kept it within a ratio and they kept their eye on that. So I do expect a fiscal anchor, and I do expect there to be something that they're keeping a firm eye on, though I do think there will be a lot of spending in this budget. I also would go so far as to say I think this is the last big budget we're going to see for a long time.
All right, Tim, what are your thoughts on the need to show something about fiscal anchors or a path to balance?
Yeah, I think everybody wants it. It's not just the market. They want to know that there's a path out. They want to know. It also provides some sense of security going forward. It also helps with investment planning. So I think they need to get there. And I think they need to shadow it sooner. They also need to do that to manage the political attacks that are going to come their way from the Conservatives and others who say they don't understand fiscal rectitude, they don't care about it. Bigger vulnerability for the government as time goes on.
Final thought from you on this and the need to show some sort of bottom lining in this budget and as Tim says, a pathway out.
Well, look, I would be surprised if the Conservative leadership candidates don't already have their press release written that this is the most atrocious thing ever. My goodness, I know my cynicism today. But look, the reality is this will be hopefully a budget. People can say, okay, coming out of this pandemic, there are some certain cracks in this country we need to start to shore up. What does that look like? Are these things so far down the road, Peter, that no one actually believes? Question mark, and certainly something I'm looking for. Does there need to be a path to prudency? Sure, but that's austerity. That is also investing in our values as Canadians.
All right. Well, we'll see what we end up with tomorrow when we get the budget. Thank you all for your perspectives tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Peter.
And that is all for another edition of Primetime Politics on CPAC. I'm Peter Van Dusen from all of us here. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.